Hello and welcome. Hi, my name is Stephanie Grant, and I'm here to introduce to you Tripp Babbitt. He is creator of the 95 Method, columnist and author of articles in the Quarterly Digest, as well as other magazines, and he is host of the Deming podcast. Today he's going to be presenting on What If, Transformation, an approach for the adoption of Deming philosophy. Thank you.
Everybody hear me okay? There we go. Okay, we're going to start out. We're going to do something a little bit different. Everybody stand up. If you can. If you can't, that's okay, Gordon. All right, if your birth date was an even number, put your hands about this far apart. Okay? And if your birthday is an odd number, put them together. All right? Hang on. All right, so I got my selfie in, and that way it looks like everybody was giving me a standing ovation, so no matter how I do, right? Is that? All right, very good. Okay, what if transformation? We'll move on from that. Okay. A different approach for the adoption. This is what I want to show you today, is a different approach. Why? Because the Deming philosophy is not an organizational norm or a cultural norm or anything, and I'm a strong believer that it should be. Large organizations, which I've spent most of my life working with, very large, 500 plus governments, organizations of that size, and it's very difficult to get transformation that you're looking for, and I think that they require a different approach. Future trends require new strategies, and I'm going to be talking about that as we go through these slides. There's some things that are happening in the world that are really going to influence about how change is going to happen. Okay, now I love this. I got this from Gordon's daughter. The Gift of Desperation, Japan. After World War II, we all know the story, and if you don't, just briefly, they were in a pretty bad state. They were defeated in World War II. There's a widespread poverty, well documented even by Dr. Deming, talking about some of the things he saw there after World War II. Few natural resources. And the only thing we really have equivalent to that here in the States are organizations that are bankrupt or closest to. And you know, those are the types of organizations that I seem to hear from a lot, when it's almost too late. So there aren't many organizations out there that have this gift of desperation. So how does change happen in organizations? Well, typically it's top-down, and it looks something like this. Somebody comes up with a vision, you get a strategic plan put together, you come up with a bunch of measures, you get projects, and then you implement, and then you monitor it. Does that look familiar? Everybody unfamiliar with this? Okay. So we have a second thing. If we don't have desperation, we've got to have the omnipotent CEO, somebody who's been enlightened with the Deming philosophy. The belief is that performance is CEO dependent. Wall Street rewards and vilifies the CEO. And but it's interesting because we always talk about the system and not the individual. That's a part of the Deming philosophy. Seems to be something that doesn't quite fit. What about sustainability? Even if we have an enlightened CEO, what happens after the enlightened CEO leaves? Does it continue? I just had a conversation with Dick Steele this morning, and there aren't many organizations that have second generation even using the Deming philosophy. So how widespread and how sustainable is it? And what about the future? And Lori Fry talked about this a little bit this morning, but I had the opportunity to talk to David Houle. Is anybody familiar with David? Good stuff, futurist. I interviewed him for a different podcast, not the Deming Institute podcast, and he talks in his book about the increasing rate of change. Things are happening so rapidly. 60% of the people in the world right now have electricity, but almost 90% now have cell phones. And it only happened in a matter of 2+ decades. This has been fueled by the internet. Things are going global. Everything's more global. It's a smaller world. And the power is going to the individual. And there's several reasons why this is happening. And if you look even at the Arab Spring, about some of the things that happened there, happened over Twitter. Getting people together to organize against the existing regime. So hierarchy and structure will continue to erode. This is happening. A shortage of labor will fuel the erosion. And this is what Lori talked about this morning. I'm just going to expand on it a little bit. What about the future of labor? In the next 100 years, George Friedman, who I haven't talked to, talks about the population bust. And it's a major labor shortage in industrialized nations. There aren't going to be enough workers. The situation that we live in now, we're starting to see it, where we don't have the right skilled workers for being able to fill the positions. This is only going to get worse. Countries will need immigrant workers and pay to get them. Now, this is a prediction. This isn't necessarily what's going to happen, but this is what George Friedman extrapolated out. In another book, and I did get a chance to talk to Robert Quinn, he's at the University of Michigan, Deep Change or Slow Death. Now, if you're an individual in an organization, you may be feeling like you are going through slow death, especially if you know the Deming philosophy, right? Because it's hard to get the change that you're looking for. Pressure for organizational change comes from the outside world, according to Robert Quinn. Organizational change builds pressure for individual change. Dominant coalitions, self-seal beliefs, making deep change difficult. This is from Chris Ardress. Self-seal in these coalitions. There is a managing coalition within every organization that has the power, that makes things happen. The external system is not out there. Because it was funny, as I've listened to different conversations at some of the tables for the Deming coffee, I heard people talk about, well, you know, it's this system out there that you know, I just can't change that. The problem is it lives inside each of us. It's cultural. It's in there. Where you may be right about one thing, there may be something else that counters that. But here's the thing that Robert Quinn, and when I talked to him about this, I thought, wow, I like this guy. Anyone can be the catalyst for change. If you look for examples, we look at Martin Luther King, we look at Gandhi. Those are two examples of people who had no power, but were able to affect large-scale change. So what are the prerequisites for change? These are courtesy of Edgar Schein, who's written quite a bit about culture. You have to have this equilibrium. And I took a sales class many years ago from the Sandler Sales Institute, and a lot of what they do is based in the psychology. They reference that as pain. That an individual has to have some type of pain in order to make change. The second thing is connection to goals or ideals. In the US, as I went to one of Doug Hall's sessions last week on innovation, he was talking about that he uses greed as his end to use innovation using Deming's thinking. And that's a big one. If you can associate pain with money, that usually will get you pretty far. But here's the third one. And this is the one that really caught my eye, because I knew the first two. But it's the creation of psychological safety. How does someone become safe? And especially leaders or individuals in an organization, how do they become safe with the change that you have going on in your organization? Well, there's three strategies for change. And this is probably one of the best books I have ever read. It's called The Planning of Change, and it's not in print. So rush out and get your Amazon used book copy, because there's only like 12 left, I think. So the three strategies are power-coercive. I'm going to tell you, we're going to use the structure, we're going to use the hierarchy in order to have you do something, or wars if you want. Empirical-rational. I'm going to have a conversation with you, and I'm going to try and convince you of my side, and we have a lot of good discussion, but that doesn't necessarily change my thinking. Most used are power-coercive and empirical-rational. The one that's least used and most needed, normative-reeducative. And what this is experiential learning. That you have to experience for yourself in your own way, in your own subjective manner, in order for change to happen. Now, I'm reading this stuff and I'm experiencing some of this. And it wasn't until I interviewed Paula Marshall for the Deming Institute podcast that I finally found the example I was looking for. And you can listen to it on the podcast. There's my advertisement. I got that one in. When I talked to Paula in that interview, she talks about how she'd spent $1 million on performance appraisal systems. And when she went at the invitation of McDonald's, because Paula Marshall is the CEO for Bama Companies, which makes the apple pies for McDonald's exclusively, all over the world, big company. $1 million she just spent on a performance appraisal system. But Dr. Deming used a normative experience, experiential learning, to unravel her brain. He just didn't say, get rid of performance appraisals. You're stupid if you don't. He took her through, and if you listen to the podcast, he takes her through how performance appraisals, by having her go back and do things at her organization, where he went back and said, oh, okay, so you have a 1 to 5 scale. So why don't you go back and instead, why don't you try maybe a 0 to 10, see how that works. That ought to be better. Because her problem was everybody was an 8.8, or a 4.4, excuse me, on a 5-point scale, yet the company was losing money and the quality was bad. So how could that be? She had to unlearn or unfreeze before moving forward. And this gets to Lewin's model. It's basically 3 steps. We have to unfreeze our thinking, we have to make a change, and then we refreeze. But with the ever-increasing rate of change, we always have to have whatever we build very malleable, because things change quickly. And having an omnipotent CEO that makes all decisions, when things are changing very quickly, by the day, by the hour, by the time a report hits the CEO, it's over. So we need to unfreeze in a normative way. Unfreezing requires a different perspective. And an assumption of the current assumptions, beliefs, norms, and values are required. So these are the top 2 things that have to be addressed. And this is what I address in the method that I came up with. Otherwise, you repeat what is inside you, as Robert Quinn said. The culture isn't out there, it's inside us. Beware of cognitive dissonance, and learning is individual and subjective, which we talked about before. Now, cognitive dissonance just means that I can tilt you where I say something so unbelievable that you're going to sit there and say, no, I don't care what you say from now on, because you said that, I'm not listening. And in the Planning of Change, there's an excellent story in there. It's kind of strange, but at the same time, I thought it was fairly effective. It was talking about a person who was convinced that they had been dead for a year. So the people that went to this person said, look, if you were dead, do you agree with me that you wouldn't be able to believe? finally convinced them that was probably true. So they pricked him, and he bled. And that person said, I was wrong. Dead people do bleed. So that's the cognitive dissonance that we run into with regards to any change that is outside what we can handle. And this is where experiential learning comes. So it was Peter Schultes, and I'm glad Kelly's here, because he had a chance to work with him. I saw him in Indianapolis back in 1990 or so, that said that you have to unfreeze, well, he didn't say unfreeze, but he said you had to learn customer in. That anything else is selfish arrogance. The customer in view gives a new perspective, like no other. The customer gives you a perspective that functional areas within an organization cannot give you. It provides you a focal point. It requires observation and understanding. Customers see things in a more systemic way than we do. When we're in an organization, I like to say that we've taken the dumb pill, because we forget what it's like to be a customer. But customers don't see functions. When they have a problem and they're talking to someone at a contact center, they don't care that you don't know and you have to pass it on to someone else. All they know is they want an answer. They're very systemic thinkers. New questions and understanding emerge when you take a customer in view. Most of the workshops that I do are around taking that customer in view, because it gets everybody, one, on the same page, and two, that perspective that helps unfreeze them. Now, I came up with this because I was trying to think of a name, because I thought it was so important I had to come up with something, but I thought there would be more axioms. The absolute design axiom, kind of clunky, isn't it? An axiom is a self-evident or universally recognized truth. And it's pretty basic. No customer, no profit. Now, you wouldn't believe how many times I've been on LinkedIn and had arguments with people that say, no, profit's more important than customer. So I always have to start here, and then we kind of got to get that out of the way to make sure that people are on the same page. The axiom is proclaimed by all. Customer is always first. Customer is most important. However, our organizations fail to walk the talk. Their actions don't follow what they say, that their values are. A customer in view is very revealing. The next question is that we have to understand our current assumptions. And what are they? Now, Dan Robertson, and I'm not doing this just because Dan's in the room. I do this all the time now, because 2 years ago I had a very important conversation during the summer with Dan. We sat in a coffee shop for about 5 hours and talked. But Deming's Profound Changes, to me, is a book that everyone should read. And the reason being is it takes you through the adventures of his teacher, Dan Robertson, Ken De Levine, Perry Gluckman, who is a student of Dr. Deming at NYU. Now, I read this back in '92, and then I reread it 4 or 5 years ago, and that's where I started making some connections. Frederick Taylor and scientific management have influenced our thinking about the design and management of work and the way it's being done. That was in 1911. That's why we have functionally separated departments. That's the design of the work that we have. That's why everything's down to the individual. It started all of that, and also went into what he referenced in the book as neo-Taylorism, too. So things have morphed from there, but they're kind of around this. It's kind of like the acorn doesn't fall far from the oak tree. It's pretty close to the same thing. And if you read about these things, it started getting me to think that, boy, if that's what's ruling our thinking, that's what we're trying to change from and to from a Deming perspective. We're trying to move away. And apparently Dr. Gluckman, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, which I'm sure you will, is that this is what he learned, Perry Gluckman learned at NYU from Dr. Deming. But I don't hear this talked about enough. And when you're trying to unravel your perspective, you kind of need to know, okay, well, where did that come from? Newtonian determinism has not been replaced by modern science. We still think in a linear fashion. The way I explained this to my daughter, oh my dad, not again, 17, you know how that goes. I said, well, Newtonian determinism, very linear, 1 + 1 = 2. Modern science, 1 + 1 = 3. Oh, I got that from your slide there, Doug. So, how does that happen? Well, if we look at the Japanese and what they did, let's say with auto manufacturing or consumer electronics, it wasn't just Toyota that Deming changed. He changed many industries in the way that they manage their work and the way that work is done. You may have started with 500 workers and been able to create 1,000 cars. And then maybe it was 500 workers creating 2,000 cars. And then 500 workers creating 4,000 cars. But more than that, the quality of the things coming off of the line was so high that consumers didn't have to take their cars back. And the synergistic effects of improving the quality of things leads us out of that linear world. So here's what I've found. And when I go into this with organizations, I basically tell them, don't worry about what mine are. This is what I got from Dan Robertson's book and my personal observations. But there are 7 perspectives. There's an individual perspective, which is everything's down to the individual. The individual is responsible. We got to reward that individual. We have to pay attention to the individual. We got to inspect the individual. We have the self-centered perspective, which is we look at everything from the inside out. This is why customer in, right? How about a cure-all perspective? Oh, technology will fix it. The guru will fix it. Control. We've got plenty of that. Financial controls, separation of work, audits, inspection. Financial perspective. Very prominent in U.S. organizations and even government. How much is that going to cost? Dick Steele wants me to ask this question to every podcast interview that I do, and it's actually a good one. Do you want to say it, or? Okay. Well, it's what have you changed that does not have a measure? That is not measurable. Profound question. Functional perspective. Departments. It's amazing. Is it more than coincidental that every organization that you walk into has a sales department, an operations department, a technology department, an HR department? Why did we do that? Well, some of it's steeped in Taylorism. But the other thing is most organizations don't look at it any other way. That's a given. So when I go into organizations, I start to redesign them. I start to look at it differently. And when you look at it from a customer perspective, you can design it differently. Nobody says that. That's not the rule. And the 7th is productivity perspective. How much can I get out? How many people do I have? How many calls do I get? Those types of things. All right. So organizational performance. Performance, then, is this customer interaction or this customer in view with organizational perspectives. These two things collide to create performance. So we take that customer in view. We've got these 7 perspectives that are designing our work and the organizational design that we have. However, what if, and this is then the name of my session, an organization uses different beliefs and assumptions? What happens? Well, I'm changing the system, so something's going to happen. It might be good and it might be bad. I use something called the power prototype. Now, what is this? Well, you establish an aim, and I have somewhat of a different view on aim, which is I think the aim is separated into three pieces. It's one aim, three components, because I think it's the way that people go through and establish, they get more knowledgeable about their system. You've got to first of all understand what the customer's aim is. What are they trying to get out of your particular system? Then when you get greater knowledge, then you're able to, as Dr. Deming would say, nobody ever asked for a light bulb. So you've got to have a depth of knowledge to be able to get to innovation. What business are you really in? And then the third one, which I think is coming up now, is greater good. We're seeing more organizations do things that are good for the earth, good for society, those types of things. And I think you're going to see more of that. So we use different principles in a power prototype. And this is the way I describe it. Small scale, large scope change. Now, most organizations, when they go for change, they go for large scale but small change, and it keeps getting whittled back in organizations. It's just the way it happens. So instead, I've taken the attitude that if you do things on a small scale, which is very Deming, there's nothing really new there, other than the fact that we're doing very large scope change. You have performance appraisals, we do a prototype, we're not doing performance appraisals. And in large organizations where it's very difficult to get change across a broad section, starting small and understanding what the effect is on your system is a learning process. So small scale, large scope change. And we just experiment. We fail a lot, as Doug would say. But we fail fast. And it creates this other thing called psychological safety. It's only a small geographic region of customers. It's only a group of customers that we're going to experiment and do different things with. We're going to learn. And then if we like what design that we come up with, we begin to expand it. Instead of 12 people, maybe it's to 20. From 20, maybe it's to 50. From 50 to 100, from 100 to 500. And this then starts to bump up against the things that have to be removed in an organization as you grow it slowly. But it happens relatively quickly. Most of the redesigns that I do, you can study your system, customer in, understand your perspectives in a matter of 6 weeks. Even large organizations. And then you can redesign your system in another 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the organization, or until the money runs out, as somebody's told me. Which is, now I've got a design that's better than what I have, but not just a better design, but a significant better design because I've done large scope change. A new design emerges from experimentation using Plan, Do, Study, Act. And for those of you who I've heard during the course of some of the meetings we had at the back of the room and even at lunch, Plan, Do, Study, Act is a scientific method. It's a way of learning, experimenting and learning. Plan, Do, Study, Act. Okay. So rapid learning. We have time. Okay. All right, I'm going to have to set this up for a second because it didn't launch. Oh, where'd it go? What this is a quick video about rapid learning and failing. And I watched this a few years ago, and I talked to the gentleman that you'll see on here, and I said, that's fantastic. I got to play this at some point. And I have ever since, actually. So hopefully you enjoy it. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long.
So I want to give an example. This is the design challenge. So build the tallest structure you can that supports a marshmallow, right? So here's what you get. For a team of 4, 20 pieces of spaghetti, a meter of tape, 1 piece of string, freestanding, you get 18 minutes. Now, how would you approach that problem? Would you just start building? Would you sketch? Would you talk about it first with your group? Well, I've been doing this exercise for over 5 years, and I've tested about 700 people. And over the last year, I've had an epiphany about how teams approach design problems. So I've done university schools, business school students at Cal, at Berkeley, 150 telecom engineers in Taiwan, students at the University of Tokyo, and a bunch of engineers and managers at various companies. And I had some thoughts about how people learn. You learn by doing, anticipating problems you could not have understood before you started. Very few people understand the structural properties of uncooked spaghetti. You know, maybe Danny Myers does, but you know, and you work in parallel by learning, seeing other teams around you. Being first to market is usually bad because you actually want to learn from the mistakes of those around you. And multiple iterations almost always beats the single-minded focus around a single idea. All projects have resource constraints, but you won't get any more unless you ask. And people often self-edit heavily, right? So this applies to everything, not just design, with the possible exception of marriage, where you generally want to try to limit the number of iterations. And it's also good not to be first to market. So the Taiwanese engineers were excellent, you know, pretty good median score, around 24 inches, and they were methodical and efficient. They didn't game the rules, but they were not the highest scoring. Here's the epiphany. The highest scoring group of all was kindergartners, had an average score of 25 inches, right? And they outperformed the lowest performing group of all, business school students. Now, why is that? You know, maybe I had a particularly high-performing group of kindergartners, but why are they so much better? Well, you know, they don't talk about who's going to be CEO of Spaghetti Corporation for 5 minutes. You know, they just get in and they start doing it, and they learn the materials, and they don't talk about the problem. And it's amazing sort of watching how they learn. They just do it. You prototype, you test, you prototype, test, usually until the budget or the schedule forces you to ship something, right?
Oh, stop. It's like the end of Hey Jude, right? Okay, just a review. Change is happening more rapidly than ever before. I know that's the end. Change is happening more rapidly than ever before. Excluding the front line, excluding the others with the thinking of authority
I
and
welcome
the
Bill
omnipotent.
Reck, environmental engineer, and Kevin Ogles to our presentation today on planning and design of livestock watering systems.
Oh, it does.
So,
Oh.
Bill, I'm getting ready to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Holly. All right, here we go.
Well, that's kind of funny.
Today we're going to talk about livestock watering facility design.
Well, we could learn about livestock
primarily
watering
from a
facility design.
planning considerations perspective, and we're going to go over. I'm going to give you a lot of terminology, and
I close this. Oh, there it is. There we go. Back to that. Sorry about that. Livestock design.
Okay, I've never thought about that one. Okay, review. Change is happening more rapidly than ever before. Our electronic connectedness is allowing that to happen. Knowledge doesn't just go to one person anymore. It can be, the memes that go on Twitter and LinkedIn and all these types of things. There's so much information out there. Matter of fact, it was David Houle that told me that all the data between the beginning of time and the year 2000 is being created weekly now. That's how fast we're creating new data. Position and power does not matter with change. Gandhi, Martin Luther King. Anyone can be the impetus for change. Prerequisites for change are pain, but having the psychological safety. And I think that psychological safety is a real important component, and that's why the prototype. Because you do it on a small scale, you can make large scope changes, but keep everybody safe. And especially the CEO, because they're there to protect the organization. You use a normative-reeducative approach, a normative, experiential learning, as opposed to coercion and rationalization, which we are so good at. It's 90% of what we do. If we can use that 10% and begin to expand that, I think we can begin to make change, especially around the Deming philosophy. A customer in perspective gives you something different than the internal view that you have. Now, I'm doing a workshop in New York on Thursday, and one of the things I'm going to have them do, I've never tried this before, but I'm going to do it, is I'm going to give them some measures that they use in contact centers, because that's the group, and I'm going to have them say, okay, give me what perspective you're, not judging, but just what perspective of the 7 that I had, the individual, the financial, and so forth, do you cause this measure to be in existence? Now, what would the customer think about that? Talking at the table back here about average handle time. What would customers think about average handle time? Right? I mean, the classic story I have is I won't mention it, well, the airline's been merged, but it was Northwest, and I was on the phone with them. I was doing some international travel, and I was talking to the agent on the phone, and all of a sudden, after about a 10-minute conversation, trying to get an idea of what this country was as far as getting in and out and all those types of things, she goes, I got to go. I said, what? She says, I got to go. She goes, I've used up all my talk time. Happened. That's real. So customer in perspective gives us a focal point that no other perspective will give you. And studying a customer in is very enlightening. Understand your current assumptions and beliefs. Taking inventory of them. What is it? Don't be judgmental about it. And I think that's one of the problems, actually, with the Deming community. We become very judgmental about, and I was the worst, because it made such logical sense to me. But it's not to be judgmental. The question is, if we use different beliefs and assumptions, what might we get? So final thoughts. You can design anything in or out of your system. Poverty, unemployment has all been designed in to the system that we have. It can be designed out. Anyone can be the impetus for change, not just the CEO. And matter of fact, I think it's important that the front line has to get it. Everyone in the organization has to get it, and not just the CEO, or we lose sustainability. And we also lose the 80% we lose from getting innovation from the front line because they don't understand the end-to-end system. So when I go out and I take a group of executives, I always have an equivalent of the same number of frontline people sitting with the executives. Well, and it's amazing. So, when they sit with each other, sometimes they're like, who is that? When they're looking at the executives, which is a shame. So, but you're going to need a method in the Deming philosophy to guide you. Because once I started, I worked with different service design firms in Europe, in Australia, and in the United States, and other disciplines. And the one thing that that really broke through to huge change was adding the Deming philosophy in, starting looking at things from that particular perspective. And we began to experiment with those things on a small scale, large scope change. I have a free ebook out there. This is much of advertisement because it's free. But it takes you through the things. So chapter 1 will take you through how to take a customer in view. Chapter 2, take inventory of your perspectives. Chapter 3, identify the new principles that you want to experiment with. And then build the power prototype. Questions? Oh, who knows who General John F. Reynolds is? Anybody? Just curious. Know that name? No history buffs, huh? Like if we're in Washington, D.C., I'd find somebody. Civil War, good. That narrows it. He's the general that died on the first day. General John Fulton Reynolds. And I'd like to go back to Gettysburg. And one of the things, there is a lesson from there. And that is that General Reynolds made it a practice to go see what was happening. You'd get scouts that would come back during the battle and they would tell him what was going on. But Reynolds was always like, no, I got to go. I want to see it for myself. So he would know the context of what's going out there. So if you're a CEO or a manager or somebody like that, you aren't going to put your life in danger. That's the good thing. But you will be able to see things that you would otherwise not get context from in any report. Okay? Questions? Got a few minutes left anyway. No questions? Didn't stir up anything in your head. Okay. Cool. Yes, Dick.
From a systems perspective, everything interconnected. How do you rank a hierarchy between profits and customers?
Yeah, but if there's no customer, there's still no profit.
There's no profit, there's no customer.
Right.
You got to have both in it.
Absolutely, but one has to come first.
I think there's companies that have customers without profit. I mean, not for very long.
Well, the fundamental isn't challenging that you shouldn't have profit. The issue is that if you have no customers, 0 customers, there can be no profit. It doesn't go any further than that.
Well, from a system perspective, you need it all.
Yeah, you do. You need it all. But again, what I'm talking about is the fundamental piece of if you didn't have a railroad out there that was using your services, then there would be no opportunity to have profit. We can have a deeper discussion on that. I think I know where you're going, but okay.
I like the idea of small scale, large scope change.
Okay. Why? You like small scale, large scope? Why?
Well, why? Because when you are testing it out in the system. My question is that if the system is interconnected, when you do a small scale but a large change, that will impact the rest of the system.
It will.
And can you give your insights that you have actually done this successfully? Because whether you like it or not, inadvertently
you're running into the larger system.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, anytime you even get a small group of, when it's 8 to 12 people in an organization, usually that doesn't draw much attention until they start learning what you're doing. What? No performance appraisals? What? Wait a minute. I need the contact center people are going to need access to the system so that they can answer customers' questions on the phone. What? They can have access to those systems. Those are the types of things you run into early. Now later, as you start to grow it, you start to realize I've got 30 people in my HR department for my 2,000-person organization that do nothing but shift papers around for performance appraisals. Now what are you going to do with those? Right? So those are some of the things that you wind up having to struggle with, but you do it incrementally. And typically, what you find is you can cover things through, you're increasing the capacity of the organization that as you grow it, and this is the thing, because managers are funny and executives, because they want to go fast. And it's usually, okay, well, I still don't have access to those, applications that these people need in order to do their work. So you're the holdup is basically but they're always saying, oh, because they see that, boy, if I do all these things, this is going to be really cool. And then they start running into the cultural and the functional and the things that are out there. So there are challenges, without a doubt. So how fast you go is dependent upon really the executives and the managers and what type of condition that they're in. Absolutely. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Am I on time? Good? 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
I could dance. Play the video again? We'll learn about the livestock design thing or whatever. I don't know. Yes.
You spoke about how anyone can be the impetus for change, and you gave two particularly sort of large-scale examples of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of more kind of local, organizational things that some of us may be more likely to be interacting with?
Well, how many of you here right now are CEOs? A few, right? This is one of Deming's problem. Why don't we have more CEOs in the room type of thing, right? So most of the people in here have an opportunity to go back into their own organizations. What I'm trying to do with my method is be able to help enable that to happen. Give them something that can help them see, because if you go to this is the way a lot of them happen anyway. It's going to be, it's not the CEO that's coming to me most of the time. It's going to be maybe a senior VP, or even I talk to frontline people. I've got 12 groups right now that I'm working with where it's frontline people trying to do something small, and we're working through the piece. It's easier to go to the CEO, hey, we'd like to do something a little bit different with a geographic region of customers, and here's what we think we could take, because usually CEO, okay, no big deal. Go do that. It's when it becomes something big that it starts to get attention. Now, things we are struggling with certain other, there's something else always. But the people within the group are sitting there, they're so dedicated to it, and a couple of them, that I know they're going to see it through. The reality is most change that I've seen anyway doesn't come from the CEO. In large organizations, it's very short-term thinking, right? Because most of these are publicly traded or government, and they're on the 90-day shot clock or don't do anything that might cause political havoc. So a lot of times it's the people that are within the organization, and to me, a lot of times they just need a method that will enable them to do that. And this has been helpful. It's not perfect. I buy into Dr. Deming's philosophy that basically says, there's no perfect model. Some are useful. But it's been helpful.
Tripp, we have about time for one more question.
Okay, one question. Any others? Yes?
Well, I guess following up on what she was saying, if you're an individual
Mm-hmm.
and you want to change the way things are, how would you do that? Is it a matter of persuading your immediate manager to tackle something?
No, you got to start with yourself. Because the first thing you have to do is come to grips with, first of all, Dr. Deming's philosophy, number one. Learn what you can about it. But like I said, the first 2 chapters of my, the free ebook basically takes you through giving you a different view. And I think sometimes when you have conversations with people, they kind of have a tendency to be like a recording, same thing over and over again. And what this will do is give you a different voice, a different way of explaining something, and a method to kind of go into a next step. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so it starts with you. It lives inside us. Same thing that you say, oh, it's all those other people out there. It's really yourself you have to start with. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tripp Babbitt.